A tiny island secretly redirected the flow of the ancient Silk Road. While empires rose and fell, this remote speck of land in the Indian Ocean, Socotra, wielded a power that was entirely invisible. Its control over priceless resources and secret knowledge created a hidden network that shaped global trade for centuries. By the end of this story, you will see the map of the ancient world in a completely new light. How did a place with no grand armies or monuments pull the strings of commerce across continents? What does it truly take to hold power when no one knows your name? Silhouetted against the setting sun, the dragon's blood trees of Socotra stand like silent, ancient sentinels, their umbrella-shaped crowns bleeding a dark resin that gave them their name. This landscape feels alien, a world apart, and that was precisely its power. Socotra's profound isolation in the Indian Ocean placed it at the perfect intersection of powerful monsoon winds. For any sailor daring the vast sea routes between Africa, Arabia, and India, these winds were an unchangeable natural calendar. Their journeys weren't a matter of simple navigation. They were a calculated pause, a forced stop dictated by the weather itself. And Socotra was the mandatory waiting room. Ships from across the known world would congregate in its sheltered bays, their crews forced to linger for weeks, even months, waiting for the winds to shift in their favor. This wasn't merely a stopover, it was a grand, involuntary pivot point. In that shared isolation, far from the eyes of kings and tax collectors on the mainland, a unique space emerged. Rival merchants who might never trade directly in their home ports found themselves on neutral ground. Here, they could barter freely, exchange not just goods but news and navigational secrets, forming temporary alliances. The island's remoteness, which seemed like a disadvantage, was its ultimate asset, creating a secure, unofficial trading floor in the middle of the ocean. This geographical quirk made Socotra a silent partner in every voyage, but its true influence was rooted in something far more tangible than its location, something that grew from its very soil. That deep red resin, prized for its color and its mystery, was the island's first true anchor in the world of high commerce. On the mainland, dragon's blood was not merely a product, it was a legend. Ancient physicians valued it as a powerful astringent to seal wounds and treat dysentery. Artists and craftsmen used it to create varnishes of unparalleled depth and durability for their finest works. And as you heard, it was the secret ingredient in the most expensive cosmetics and dyes, a status symbol for the elite from Rome to the Indus Valley. Think of the Roman noblewoman applying that vibrant lipstick. She was likely unaware that its essential pigment had traveled from a lonely island at the edge of the known world, passing through countless hands on a journey she could scarcely imagine. Socotra possessed a complete natural monopoly. No other place on Earth could produce this specific resin in such quantity and quality. This wasn't a monopoly enforced by law or army, but by nature itself. That single fact created an economic gravity well, an irresistible pull that drew merchant ships across dangerous seas. They came not just for a convenient stopover, but out of sheer necessity. If you wanted the real dragon's blood, you had to go to Socotra. This demand for one unique resource established the first, most tangible thread of the island's influence, weaving it directly into the luxurious and lucrative fabric of transcontinental exchange. But this resin was only one strand in a much richer tapestry. The island's true genius lay in how it bundled its rare treasures together, creating a commercial pull that was far greater than the sum of its parts. Yet the island's red gold was just the beginning of Socotra's invisible portfolio. Its real wealth was rooted in a living pharmacy, a collection of plants found nowhere else on Earth. Twisted succulents like the Dorstenia gigas clung to the cliffs, while the bizarre, bottle-shaped cucumber tree stood in the valleys. In the hands of skilled physicians from Arabia and India, these were not oddities, they were miracles. Texts by scholars like al-Biruni detail how these plants were believed to cure everything from common stomach ailments to more complex spiritual maladies. This created a trade in wellness and life itself, a high-value cargo of dried leaves, roots, and barks that was perfectly suited for long-distance voyages. A small satchel of the right preparation could be worth more than its weight in spices, but the true power was not just in the plants themselves. It was in the knowledge of how to find them, when to harvest them, and how to prepare their potent remedies. This specialized understanding became a form of intellectual capital, a secret science held by the island's inhabitants. A merchant might bring his silver, but he could not simply walk into the forest and find the cure he sought. He needed a local guide, a translator of this alien landscape. This necessity transformed the Socotrans from simple suppliers into indispensable intermediaries. They controlled the entire chain, from the earth to the end product, granting them a soft power that resonated across continents. A sultan's health, a queen's fertility, an entire army's resilience could, in some small way, depend on the secrets held by the people of this forgotten island. This botanical power, this trade in hope and healing, was a key ingredient in the island's secret recipe for influence, a force that attracted seekers of knowledge from the known world. But what happens when such a unique and fragile ecosystem becomes the center of global demand? How does an island manage the weight of being the world's only source? But Socotra's influence was not confined to the tangible goods that could be carried in a ship's hold. Its most profound power was rooted in something far more abstract, yet universally understood: value itself. The deep, clear waters surrounding the island were a primary source for a specific type of small, glossy shell, the money cowry. To our modern eyes, these might look like simple seashells, beautiful but insignificant. Yet for centuries across vast stretches of Africa and Asia, these shells were money. They were a fundamental unit of exchange, a currency accepted from the markets of Bengal to the kingdoms of West Africa. Think of a merchant from India wanting to buy ivory from a trader on the Swahili coast. Their silver coins might be worthless there, their silks might not be the right kind. But a basket of these specific, flawless cowrie shells, that was a language of value everyone understood. Socotra wasn't just a supplier of this currency, it sat at the very source. The island's merchants and sailors became more than traders. They were the gatekeepers of a monetary system. They could gather the shells, sort them for quality, and then strategically release them into the trade routes they controlled. By bundling these shells with their other rare goods like dragon's blood resin or medicinal plants, they could effectively set exchange rates, offering a package deal of goods and the very currency needed to buy more goods elsewhere. This gave them an invisible form of financial leverage. A decision made on a Socotran beach to withhold a shipment of shells could, through a long and complex chain of commerce, subtly tighten the money supply in a market 1,000 miles away. They were influencing economies without an army, without a central bank, without ever appearing to be in charge. This control over a fundamental token of value made the island a silent partner in every transaction, a ghost in the machine of ancient global trade. Yet even this financial power was just one layer of a much deeper, more personal connection that held the entire system together. That Socotran sailor, sharing a whispered warning, held a power far beyond any single chest of cowrie shells or bundle of resin. He and his kin were the living, breathing nervous system of this oceanic network. While empires built roads and posted edicts, the Socotrans mastered something far more fluid and immediate: the flow of information itself. Their lives were spent in constant motion between the great ports, their small, agile vessels slipping in and out of harbors from East Africa to southern India. In every port they listened. They absorbed the gossip of the docks, the official proclamations read in town squares, and the quiet anxieties of merchants in crowded tavernas. A rumor of a new tax in the port of Aden, whispered over a shared meal, became a piece of strategic intelligence. News of a failed pearl harvest in the Gulf of Mannar was not just a sad story, it was a forecast of rising prices and shifting demand. This constant, quiet accumulation of knowledge gave them an unparalleled view of the entire trading world. They didn't just know the winds and currents, they understood the political climate, the economic pressures, and the human ambitions that truly moved goods across the globe. This information asymmetry, this deep and current knowledge that others lacked, became their most potent form of currency. A Persian captain, laden with silk and porcelain, would gladly pay a premium, not just in silver but in future favors, for a simple, quiet conversation with a Socotran navigator. That conversation could save his ship from pirates lurking in a narrow strait, or guide him to a port where his specific goods would fetch double the price. With a single piece of advice, a Socotran could redirect the wealth of an entire fleet, determining which city would prosper from its arrival and which would be left waiting. Their power was soft, subtle, and entirely conditional, resting on the trust they cultivated across cultures. They became the trusted advisors to the masters of the sea, the unseen hand that gently nudged the compass of commerce. This role as information broker cemented their place not as a mere stop on the route, but as the central processing unit of the entire Silk Road of the Sea, a living library whose most valuable volumes were written in memory and spoken word. This cultural and linguistic tapestry was the island's ultimate operating system. Walk through the bustling, temporary markets of its shores, and the air itself would have been thick with a dozen different tongues. A Greek merchant, haggling over the price of incense, might find his broken Arabic patiently understood by a local trader who then turned and seamlessly switched to a Dravidian dialect to close a deal for pepper with a captain from southern India. This was not just about words, it was about worldviews. A Christian cross carved into a cave wall stood not far from a stone altar where sailors made offerings to the spirits of the wind and sea for a safe passage, while the distant call to prayer from a small Muslim community echoed at sunset. Socotra did not merely tolerate this diversity, it thrived on it. The islanders became masters of cultural code switching. They understood the nuanced etiquette required to negotiate with a Zoroastrian from Persia, the proper gifts to honor a Hindu official, and the unspoken rules of building rapport with a merchant from the Roman world. This deep cultural fluency transformed them from mere brokers of goods into essential mediators of meaning. When a misunderstanding over a contract threatened to derail a major deal, it was the Socotran elder, respected by all sides, who could step in and translate not just the language but the intent. He could explain why the Greek merchant's directness was not an insult, and why the Indian trader's circuitous haggling was a sign of respect. This ability to prevent conflict, to build a bridge of trust where none existed, was priceless. It made the island the most reliable and efficient port of call in the entire ocean. A merchant knew that on Socotra, his foreignness was not a liability, but simply another thread in the vibrant local fabric. This carefully cultivated environment of mutual understanding ensured that deals were not just made, but that they stuck, fostering partnerships that lasted for generations. The island's real product was not resin or shells, but reliability itself, a reputation built on its unique capacity to make everyone feel at home in the middle of nowhere. This deeply ingrained identity, forged in the fires of constant cultural exchange, would become its greatest shield when the winds of change began to blow from the mainland. The very invisibility of Socotra's harbor was its masterstroke. While Aden and Muscat built towering warehouses and grand quays, Socotra operated like a ghost in the machine. You would not have found a sprawling stone port there, no grand bazaar etched permanently into the coastline. Instead, trade happened in the liminal spaces, just beyond the sight of any imperial tax collector. Large merchant vessels would anchor safely in the deep, sheltered bays, their hulls heavy with cargo. From there, a flotilla of small, agile local boats would swarm out, shuttling goods to and from the shore in a quiet, efficient ballet. The real marketplace might be a secluded beach or a hidden cove, a temporary setup that could vanish without a trace once the monsoon winds shifted and the ships departed. This was the Phantom Port, a trade hub designed to leave no paperwork and almost no physical evidence. For a merchant carrying a cargo of incense destined for a rival kingdom, or a shipment of rare medicines that could spark diplomatic incidents, this discretion was priceless. It was a system built for deniability. A trader could claim his goods were acquired through neutral channels, with no embarrassing ties to a specific empire or its enemies. This allowed for the movement of sensitive goods, the kind that carried not just commercial value, but immense political risk. The very lack of grand ruins on Socotra's shores is not a sign of its insignificance, but the clearest proof of its success. Its entire economic model was engineered to be felt across the world, yet remained nearly impossible to pin down on a map. It was the perfect, elusive heart for a network that thrived in the shadows, a place where the most valuable currents of the ancient world could flow, unseen and untaxed. The silent stones of Socotra speak in a chorus of forgotten tongues. Etched into the walls of caves and onto the faces of boulders, you can find the elegant curves of South Arabian script, the precise geometric forms of Brahmi from India, and the bold letters of Greek, all carved by the hands of merchants and sailors who stopped here over 1,000 years ago. These are not grand proclamations of kings or conquests. They are the intimate, fleeting marks of people far from home. One inscription might be a simple prayer for a safe voyage, offered to a foreign god. Another is just a name, a ship's identifier, a way for a captain to say, "We were here." Each one is a frozen moment of contact, a personal signature left on the world's most remote bulletin board. When linguists piece these fragments together, they are not just translating words, they are mapping the invisible currents of human movement. The rise and fall in the frequency of these scripts acts as a historical tide chart. A cluster of Ethiopian jazz inscriptions from a certain century points to a surge in trade with the African coast. A later wave of Tamil Brahmi reveals a shift in commercial alliances toward southern India. This epigraphic tapestry provides the hard evidence that written histories, focused on emperors and armies, consistently overlook. It gives a voice to the island's truly multilingual populace, the dockworkers, the local traders, the guides, who had to be fluent in the languages of commerce to survive. The sheer variety of scripts, all existing side by side without anyone dominating the others, confirms that Socotra was a genuine international zone, a place where no single empire could plant its flag for long. It was a neutral ground governed by mutual need, and its stones are the permanent record of that delicate, powerful balance. This legacy of interconnectedness, written in stone, reveals the island's core strength, but it also begs a deeper question about the nature of its own people, the silent hosts who facilitated this global conversation. This hidden war for control was not fought with swords, but with soil and seeds. The very uniqueness that made Socotra's plants so valuable also made them a target for a new kind of theft, botanical espionage. Imagine a foreign merchant not just haggling for a bundle of dried herbs, but quietly pocketing a few live seeds from a rare aloe, or a ship's physician, under the guise of scholarly interest, carefully uprooting a small sapling of the dragon's blood tree to be hidden in a damp cloth aboard his vessel. For the empires and merchants who grew tired of paying the island's premium, the ultimate goal was to break the monopoly by transplanting it, to grow these priceless specimens in their own controlled gardens from Alexandria to Kerala. The wealth of nations, they believed, could be stolen one sprout at a time. The Socotrans were not naive to this threat. Their entire economy was rooted in this biological intellectual property. They understood that a single stolen seed could, in time, unravel the complex web of commerce that sustained them. So they became guardians. While there are no surviving stone tablets detailing official penalties, we can be certain that powerful stories and unwritten laws circulated among the islanders and the visiting sailors. Whispers would have told of a merchant who tried to smuggle out a cutting of the cucumber tree, only to have his ship meet a mysterious calamity. The dire consequences of stealing the blood of the island were woven into local legend, a potent psychological deterrent. This transformed the entire landscape into a living fortress. The gnarled, ancient dragon's blood trees, the strange Dorstenia clinging to the cliffs, they were no longer just resources. They were unwitting sentinels in a silent conflict, their survival directly tied to the island's own economic sovereignty. Every strange and wonderful plant was a soldier in this quiet war, protecting itself simply by being impossible to replicate anywhere else on Earth. This struggle to control living treasures reveals that the most valuable cargo was never what left the island, but what was forced to stay. The stories they told about this island were its first and most enduring line of defense. To a Greek scholar or a Roman naturalist, Socotra was not found on a standard map. It lived in the pages of legend. It was whispered to be the final resting place of the phoenix, that mythical bird that cyclically rose from its own ashes. Others, like the philosopher Theophrastus, wrote of it as a land of therapeutic wonders where the very air could heal and the plants held the secrets to eternal youth. This was not mere folklore, it was a powerful form of branding. That mythological status created an aura of otherworldly danger and sanctity. A potential conqueror, hearing tales of a place guarded by mythical beasts or sacred to foreign gods, might think twice before sending his fleet. Why risk the wrath of the unknown for an island of strange trees? This perception acted as a perfect filter, attracting only those who were in on the secret, the merchants and healers who understood the real value hidden beneath the legends. They came not to plunder, but to participate in a mystery. This unintentional reputation management meant that Socotra was never viewed as just another dot on the map to be claimed by an empire. It was a concept, a story, a place that existed as much in the imagination as it did in the physical world. Its legend was a moat built not of water, but of wonder, protecting its tangible treasures by wrapping them in an impenetrable cloak of myth. How does such a carefully balanced world, protected by both nature and story, finally begin to fade from memory? What force could possibly unravel a network woven so deeply into the fabric of global trade? A ship's cracked hull, battered by a monsoon it barely survived, was more than just damage, it was a death sentence. Out in the open ocean, there were no second chances. This is where Socotra's landscape offered a different kind of salvation. The island's forests were not just a source of medicine, but of literal survival. The dense, iron-hard timber of the endemic Socotran fig and other native trees was a masterclass in natural engineering. This wood was uniquely resistant to rot and the relentless assault of shipworms, making it the perfect material for emergency repairs and even full-scale ship construction. A captain facing a months-long wait for the winds to change did not just see a forced delay, he saw an opportunity. His vessel could be hauled onto the beach, its splintered planks replaced with wood that was arguably stronger than the original. The island transformed from a simple stopover into a full-service maritime garage, an unsung shipyard in the middle of the Indian Ocean. This created a profound and practical dependency. A merchant's entire fortune, his ship and its cargo, could be saved from the seabed by the resources found only on this lonely island. But the Socotrans offered more than just raw materials. Generations of living with the ocean's fury likely led them to develop unique boat-building techniques. They understood how to shape their resilient local timber into hulls that could better withstand the violent chop of the monsoon seas. This specialized knowledge, born of necessity and refined in isolation, became another invisible export. A shipwright from Arabia or India might barter fiercely for the secret of a specific joint or hull design, a piece of technological wisdom that could save countless lives and cargoes in the future. This role as a maritime service center, providing both the physical parts and the intellectual blueprints for survival, cemented Socotra's practical indispensability. It was not merely a place to trade, but a place that ensured you could continue to trade at all. This deep, technical reliance wove the island even tighter into the fabric of oceanic travel, making it a silent, steadfast partner to every vessel that dared to cross the known world. That ripple of economic influence, born in a secluded island bay, could swell into a tidal wave by the time it reached a Roman marketplace. Picture a merchant in the great port of Alexandria, anxiously watching a ship from the east finally dock. Its hold contains a fresh, substantial supply of authentic Socotran dragon's blood resin. Within hours, the news spreads through the city's guilds and apothecaries. The price for the highest quality red varnish, a staple for artists decorating the villas of the wealthy, begins to soften. A surplus had arrived. The cost of certain medicines dependent on that same resin becomes slightly more accessible. This minor adjustment in one Egyptian port would then echo outward, up the Nile to Thebes, across the sea to Rome itself, and eventually to a shopkeeper in a distant province who could now afford to stock a small vial of the precious substance. The island's production cycle, a natural rhythm of harvest and monsoon, became an invisible metronome setting the tempo for an entire sector of the Roman luxury economy. The exact same phenomenon unfolded in the opposite direction. In the magnificent Tang dynasty capital of Chang'an, a court physician might find his usual supply of Socotran aloes had run dangerously low. Perhaps a storm had delayed the ships or the island's harvest had been smaller that year. He would be forced to turn to inferior substitutes or pay an exorbitant price to a merchant hoarding the last genuine batch. This sudden scarcity did not just inconvenience one healer. It meant that the elite who relied on these specific preparations for their wellness rituals faced a shortage. The demand would spike, prices would inflate, and the effects would reverberate through the complex network of traders all the way back to the Indian Ocean. Socotra was a classic bottleneck. The entire global flow of these specific, irreplaceable goods had to pass through this single, narrow point. Any hiccup there, any delay, any shift in the wind was not absorbed by the system. It was amplified. A drought on the island could mean a financial windfall for a speculative merchant in India, and a season of political calm on its shores could lead to a sudden abundance of a rare perfume in a Persian bazaar. Its true power lay in this vulnerability. The world's most powerful empires, for all their legions and edicts, were paradoxically dependent on the stability of a lonely, invisible island they had never bothered to conquer. A merchant's ledger told a simple story of profit and loss, but his chosen route spoke of a deeper, strategic calculation. Why indeed would he guide his ship across the terrifying expanse of open ocean from India to Africa, deliberately avoiding the safe harbors and bustling markets of the Arabian coast like Aden or Muscat? The mainland ports, for all their convenience, came with a heavy price. They were choked with imperial tax collectors, each demanding their cut. They were hotbeds of local political intrigue, where a sudden shift in a sultan's favor could see a foreign trader's goods impounded. And they were saturated with competitors, all vying for the same customers and driving down margins. Socotra offered a quiet rebellion against this entire system. The island presented a bundled package of value that no mainland port could match. It was a one-stop shop for the most sought-after rare goods, from dragon's blood to medicinal aloes. It was a secure information hub where a captain could learn which mainland ports were currently safe and which were to be avoided. And crucially, it was a place to trade with drastically lower overhead, free from the grasping hands of a dozen different officials. This combination was irresistible. By choosing the Socotran pivot, a merchant wasn't just taking a different path, he was opting out of a controlled economy and into a freer, more efficient network. This silent, collective decision by thousands of captains over centuries slowly but surely bled traffic away from the mainland. The wealth that once fueled the coffers of Arabian kingdoms now began to flow through an invisible channel in the open sea, a channel whose only gatekeeper was a lonely island. The most powerful empires never saw it coming because they were looking for rivals in palaces and fortresses, not in the sheltered coves of a forgotten island. This was the ultimate leverage, the power to make the world's economic arteries bend to your will without ever drawing a sword. The most telling evidence of Socotra's power is precisely what you do not find there. You will not walk among the ruins of a grand palace or stand in the shadow of a crumbling imperial temple. This absence of monumental architecture is not an archaeological oversight. It is the central clue to understanding the island's true nature. An empire builds in stone to scream its dominance into the future, to make its name permanent. Socotra's influence was the opposite. It was transactional, fluid, and deliberately transient. Its wealth was not converted into statues and walls, but reinvested into the living, breathing network of relationships that spanned the ocean. The real archaeology of this place is subtle, a whisper carried on the wind. It is in the countless fragments of Roman amphorae and delicate Chinese celadon pottery scattered along its shores, broken remnants of meals shared and deals struck. It is in the layers of ancient campfire soot embedded in sheltered caves, the ghostly imprint of countless temporary gatherings where sailors from a dozen cultures huddled together, waiting for the wind. The island's most enduring monuments are not made of rock but of life itself. The genetic signature of its unique aloe plants, now growing in gardens from Egypt to India, is a living fossil of its economic reach. This is the archaeology of trade, a story written in perishable goods and temporary encampments that leave almost no trace. A society that invests in networks rather than in stone builds a different kind of legacy, one that is felt across the globe but remains nearly invisible at its source. The monsoon was an unbreakable contract with nature, and every captain knew its terms. For half the year, the winds blew steadily from the northeast, pushing ships from India toward the coast of Africa. For the other half, they reversed, sweeping from the southwest to carry those same vessels back. This was not a gentle suggestion. It was a tyrannical schedule that governed all movement on the water. And right at the heart of this immense seasonal clock sat Socotra, a ship laden with Indian spices caught by the winter monsoon would ride its power across the open ocean. Its first and only major landfall was this lonely island. Here it had to stop. The captain had no choice but to drop anchor and wait, sometimes for months, for the winds to shift and grant him passage home. Imagine the scene. The quiet coves, normally empty, would suddenly swell with a floating city of vessels from a dozen different cultures. The beaches transformed into a temporary metropolis of tents and campfires, a pulsating hub of humanity that appeared as if by magic and vanished just as completely when the seasons turned. The true genius of the Socotrans was that they did not see this as a random event. They saw it as a predictable tide of human opportunity. Generations of observing the skies and the sea taught them to read the subtle signs that foretold the wind's reversal. They knew with astonishing accuracy when the first ships from the west would appear on the horizon and how many to expect based on the weather patterns of the preceding year. This foresight was a profound strategic advantage. Long before the first sail was sighted, they could harvest and stockpile their most valuable resins and medicines. They could gather the finest cowry shells from the beaches. This allowed them to control the market with a calm, deliberate precision. When the first weary merchants came ashore, desperate for supplies and news, the Socotrans were not scrambling. They were ready with their goods neatly bundled and their prices already set, reflecting a deep understanding of the supply about to hit their shores. This environmental leverage extended far beyond simple commerce. They knew that the captains, trapped together for weeks, were a captive audience brimming with information. A Socotran elder sharing a meal with a Persian navigator and a Greek merchant was not just being hospitable, he was conducting strategic intelligence gathering. He learned of new political alliances forming on the mainland, of pirate activity in the Straits of Hormuz, of a failed harvest of pearls in the Gulf of Mannar. By the time the winds finally shifted and the fleet dispersed, the Socotrans held in their minds a complete current map of the entire ocean's economic and political climate. They could then whisper advice to the departing captains, guiding them towards safe harbors and lucrative markets. This mastery of the monsoon clock gave them the power to not just react to the flow of trade, but to actively orchestrate it, turning a force of nature into the ultimate tool of invisible influence. How does such a finely tuned system, built on the predictable rhythm of the wind, finally begin to unravel when a new kind of power learns to ignore the seasons altogether? This political invisibility was its ultimate diplomatic shield. Sandwiched between the colossal spheres of Rome, Persia, Axum, and the warring kingdoms of India, Socotra presented a unique problem for any would-be conqueror. To launch a full-scale naval invasion across such treacherous seas would be a logistical nightmare, a drain on imperial treasuries with a payoff that was purely theoretical. What would an empire truly gain? They would capture an island of strange trees and a few thousand people, but in the process, they would shatter the very neutrality that made the place so valuable. The merchant fleets from rival empires would simply stop coming, fearing capture or excessive taxation, and the entire economic ecosystem would collapse into nothing. It was far more profitable for every major power to simply leave the island alone, to let this strange, quiet place continue its work. Socotra became the Switzerland of the ancient seas, a sanctioned neutral zone where business could transcend politics. A Roman merchant could acquire Persian luxuries here without technically violating trade embargoes. An Axumite trader could obtain goods from a rival Indian kingdom without sparking a diplomatic incident back home. The island provided a layer of plausible deniability for the entire economic world. This was not a passive condition. The Socotrans actively cultivated this status. They likely paid nominal tributes to different powers at different times, a small price to buy a form of official indifference. They mastered the art of appearing unthreatening and universally useful, offering their services to all without ever formally pledging allegiance to any. Their survival for centuries, while mighty empires rose and crumbled around them, is a testament to the power of this deliberate strategy. In a world obsessed with visible dominion, Socotra proved that sometimes the greatest power is the power to be left alone, to operate in the quiet spaces everyone else is fighting over. The clearest skies in the Indian Ocean arched over Socotra, a perfect dome for reading the heavens. While the monsoon winds dictated when a ship could travel, it was the silent, steady burn of the stars that showed it where to go. On those long, enforced nights waiting for the weather to change, the island became an open-air university of navigation. The very isolation that made it a commercial pivot also made it an ideal observatory, far from the dust and firelight of mainland cities. Here, under a breathtaking canopy of stars, the theoretical knowledge of court astronomers met the hard-won experience of veteran sailors. An Arab scholar, clutching a carefully copied parchment of star positions, could sit with a Tamil captain whose people had sailed by the stars for 1,000 years. They would point to the same constellations but often used different names and different methods for interpreting their movements. On Socotra's quiet shores, these two systems could cross-pollinate. The scholar might learn a more precise way to judge the angle of a specific star group to determine latitude, a technique the sailor's grandfather had taught him. In return, the captain might receive a more accurate chart, correcting errors that had been copied and recopied for generations. This collaborative refinement was a form of intellectual alchemy, turning scattered celestial lore into a more reliable science for everyone. The true value was not just in having the charts, but in collectively improving them, making the entire ocean a little safer and more predictable for every trader who followed. But the most critical stellar knowledge never even left the island. The Socotrans themselves, after centuries of watching the sky from this single, fixed point, developed an unparalleled understanding of their local celestial sphere. They knew which specific star would crest a particular mountain peak to signal the start of the fishing season. They could name the constellation that, when it touched the horizon, meant the treacherous currents around a certain headland were at their calmest. This was hyper-local, life-saving data. A foreign navigator, even with the best Indian or Arabian charts, would be blind to these subtle, place-specific signs. He was utterly dependent on the Socotran pilot who could step aboard his ship and, by reading a handful of stars in relation to the island's silhouette, guide him safely through a labyrinth of hidden reefs and sudden squalls. This made the islanders not just traders of goods, but essential brokers of safe passage. Their most valuable export was sometimes simply the confidence to sail another day, a service paid for in silver, spices, and eternal gratitude. This role as a celestial crossroads, where the world's navigational knowledge was both pooled and perfected, cemented Socotra's status as the brain of the maritime Silk Road, a place where the path forward was literally written in the stars. Your family name was your most valuable currency in the ports of the ancient world. While Socotra itself was the central hub, its true network was woven from human threads stretched across the entire Indian Ocean. Through strategic marriages and the dispatch of trusted relatives, influential Socotran families established permanent outposts in every major port city. A cousin in Hormuz, a brother in Zanzibar, an uncle in Calicut, these were not just business contacts. They were blood, bound by a shared identity and a collective reputation built over generations. This created a web of trust that no formal contract could ever hope to match. Imagine a ship arriving in the bustling port of Calicut, its captain carrying a sealed token from a Socotran elder. He presents it to a merchant with a familiar family name, a man he has never met. Based on that token alone, that merchant would extend a line of credit, provide warehouse space, and vouch for the captain's character to local officials. The deal was sealed not with a signature, but with the unspoken understanding that the entire family's honor was on the line. This system drastically reduced the friction of trade. There was no need for lengthy negotiations or expensive legal intermediaries. A promise made by one member was a debt owed by the entire clan. This social capital, this invisible ledger of trust and obligation, allowed the Socotrans to move goods and capital with a speed and security that left their competitors baffled. Their network was a living organism, its nodes connected not by wires or treaties, but by the unbreakable bonds of kinship. It was an early form of global banking, where the only thing backing a loan was the weight of a family's name, a reputation carefully cultivated on a lonely island 1,000 miles away. The great empires of the mainland were like passing storms, their thunderous arrivals and quiet departions marked by the rise and fall of dynasties. As the Roman Empire's grip on Eastern trade loosened and the Persian Empire gave way to the expansive reach of the Islamic caliphates, the overland Silk Road routes experienced violent convulsions. Caravan cities that had thrived for centuries were suddenly abandoned, their fortunes buried by the sand. Yet on its lonely perch in the ocean, Socotra barely seemed to notice. Its model of power was not built on the shifting sands of political allegiance, but on a fluid, resource-based economy that could bend without breaking. When the Roman appetite for certain luxuries waned, a new demand from the caliphate for medicinal aloes would surge. The specific players on the mainland changed, but the fundamental needs for health, for currency, for safe passage, and for discreet trade did not. Socotra's genius was in its portfolio of irreplaceable assets. If the market for dragon's blood resin softened in one region, its unique aloes became the star commodity in another. When political turmoil made one set of information dangerous, the islanders simply shifted their focus to serving the new powers, offering the same essential services under a different banner. They were the ultimate opportunists, not out of greed, but out of a profound understanding that their survival depended on being useful to everyone and beholden to no one. This was not a dramatic reinvention each time a new empire appeared on the horizon. It was a subtle pivot, a recalibration of the same ancient machinery. The same ships still gathered in its coves, only now they flew different flags. The same whispered conversations happened on its beaches, only now they were conducted in Arabic instead of Greek or Pahlavi. The island's resilience lay in this profound constancy of function amidst a chaotic whirlwind of changing forms. Its influence was a chameleon, always blending into the new economic landscape, proving that the most durable power is not the kind that stands rigid against the currents of history, but the kind that learns to flow with them, finding a new path through the cracks in a changing world. The silent cost of this global demand began to etch itself into the island's unique landscape. For generations, the Socotrans had harvested their precious dragon's blood resin with a deep, inherent understanding of the tree's limits, taking only what was needed and allowing for regeneration. But as the markets of the world grew ever more hungry, that careful balance was inevitably tested. The slow, rhythmic tapping of the trees would have intensified, a quiet drumbeat pacing the rising tide of commerce. While there are no surviving records detailing a conservation crisis, the ecological logic is inescapable. A dragon's blood tree does not produce its resin endlessly. Over-harvesting would have stunted its growth, reduced its yield, and in the worst cases, killed the very source of the island's most famous wealth. This was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, creeping deficit. The island's other botanical treasures, the aloes and medicinal herbs, faced a similar quiet pressure. Each ship that sailed away laden with these rare goods was carrying off a tiny piece of the island's biological capital, a sliver of its irreplaceable genetic library. This created a fundamental tension between immediate profit and long-term survival, an ancient echo of the sustainability challenges we grapple with today. The Socotrans were likely among the first societies to confront a globalized version of this dilemma, where the health of their entire economy was directly tied to the health of a handful of endemic species. Their invisible influence on global trade, it turns out, came with a very visible and very fragile price tag written across their own soil. How does a society choose between feeding the world's desires and preserving the unique world it calls home? The most valuable cargo leaving Socotra often had no weight at all. It was the quiet observation of a technique, the shared secret of a craft passed between strangers. In the makeshift shipyards on its beaches, a master shipwright from Oman might watch, fascinated, as a local craftsman mixed the island's dragon's blood resin with a specific type of coconut fiber to create a caulking paste of incredible durability. This was a formula born of isolation, a solution to problems he had never encountered in his home port. He would carry that recipe back with him, and within a year the hulls of ships being built in Muscat might be just a little more seaworthy. Elsewhere, a farmer from the Indus Valley waiting out the monsoon could share the principles of a step-well irrigation system with a visiting merchant from the Horn of Africa. That merchant, in turn, would bring the concept home where it might be adapted to channel scarce water in a mountainous region, increasing crop yields for an entire village. These were not formal lessons or patented inventions. They were micro-transfers of practical wisdom happening in the spaces between trades, fueled by shared necessity and the unique neutral ground of the island. Socotra became a silent catalyst for innovation precisely because it was not a major urban center. Away from the rigid guilds and established traditions of great cities, there was freedom to experiment. A Persian weaver could suggest a modification to a Chinese loom design without offending a master craftsman. A Greek cartographer could correct a nautical chart with a Tamil navigator. Both men focused on the shared goal of accuracy rather than on protecting their professional status. This was a global workshop where the tools and techniques of different civilizations could be compared side by side, their strengths and weaknesses laid bare, and then combined into something new and more effective. The island's real export was this cross-pollination of ideas, an invisible current of progress that flowed out from its shores and subtly upgraded the material world across 3 continents. The scent of sanctity itself carried the island's signature. In the hushed stillness of a Hindu temple, the smoke coiling from a bronze censer was more than just fragrant air, it was a prayer given physical form. That sacred incense, a precise blend of rare resins and woods, very likely passed through the hands of merchants on a lonely island far to the west. While Socotra was not the original source for the most famous aromatics like frankincense and myrrh, its role as the ultimate neutral trading floor made it the perfect blender and distributor. Here, a shipment of Omani frankincense could be expertly mixed with a small amount of a unique, locally harvested Socotran aromatic, a secret ingredient that gave the final product a distinctive, longer-lasting smoke. This subtle alchemy elevated a simple resin into a luxury good, a branded product before brands even existed. The same was true for the court perfumers of Byzantium. When they crafted a new scent for the emperor or his inner circle, they were not just mixing oils, they were weaving a tapestry of power and prestige. The rarest components in their workshops, the ones that gave a perfume its mysterious depth and staying power, often bore the invisible stamp of a Socotran trade route. By controlling the flow and quality of these sensory commodities, the island was doing something far more profound than just moving goods. It was quietly shaping the very atmosphere of worship and the aura of power. The feeling of divine connection during a temple ritual, the unspoken statement of authority when a noblewoman entered a room, these intimate human experiences were, in part, curated by the invisible hand of an island no one in that temple or court had ever seen. Its influence was not etched in stone but carried on the wind, a ghost in the perfume and the prayer. Other great islands of the ancient world were prizes to be won and held by force. Look at Ceylon, a land of lush spices and deep harbors, constantly fought over by rival kingdoms from southern India. Its story is written in the ruins of conquered capitals and the chronicles of imperial armies. Malta became a fortress, its value measured by the strength of its walls and the warships anchored in its bay. These islands were pieces on a grand strategic chessboard, their power visible and territorial. Socotra presents a complete inversion of this logic. No empire felt the need to plant its flag permanently on its shores because its value was not in the land itself, but in the function it performed. It was a node, not a nation. While Ceylon produced cinnamon and gems that filled royal treasuries, Socotra offered something less tangible but equally vital: a guaranteed, neutral space where the complex machinery of long-distance trade could be serviced and repaired. Its power was not in defying conquest, but in making conquest seem irrelevant. A king could tax the goods that passed through his ports, but he could not easily tax the whispered advice, the emergency repairs, or the trusted introductions that happened just beyond his reach. This distinction reveals a different kind of geo-economic power, one built on networks and reliability rather than on territory and fear. The empires fought over the jewels while Socotra quietly held the string that tied them all together. That same principle of invisible leverage now powers the global economy. A single company in the Netherlands might manufacture the complex machinery required to print every advanced microchip on the planet. A handful of mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo produce the majority of the world's cobalt, a metal essential for the batteries in our phones and electric cars. These are the modern equivalents of Socotra's dragon's blood trees, hyper-specialized nodes in a vast and interconnected system. The island's story is not a forgotten historical footnote, but a 2,000-year-old blueprint for understanding how the world really works. Its power did not come from military might or territorial expansion, but from becoming utterly indispensable in a single, critical niche. When you hold something that everyone needs and no one else can adequately provide, you gain a quiet authority that transcends borders and politics. This is the enduring lesson of Socotra, a lesson that today's tech giants and resource conglomerates have learned by heart. They may not command armies, but their decisions can dictate the pace of innovation, the price of consumer goods, and the geopolitical strategies of superpowers. The ancient merchants waiting for the monsoon winds have been replaced by corporate executives awaiting a shipment of rare earth minerals, but the fundamental dynamic remains unchanged. True influence has always flowed through these narrow, vital channels, often held by the unlikeliest of hands. The story of Socotra teaches us a profound and counterintuitive truth, that history's most powerful currents are often the ones we cannot see. Empires rose and fell with great noise and spectacle, their stories etched in stone and sung by poets. Yet the true shape of our world, the very flow of ideas and goods across continents, was often guided by a much quieter hand. This forgotten island never built a monument or raised an army, yet for centuries it shaped global commerce with the subtle leverage of resin, shells, and specialized knowledge. Its power was not in defiance, but in indispensable function, a force exerted from its unique position at the crossroads of wind and wave. This reminds us that influence is not always loud and visible, announced by trumpets and marching legions. Sometimes it is the silent, pervasive force that guides the flow of civilization itself, working through networks and necessities rather than through conquest. The next time you look at a map of the ancient world, tracing the bold lines between Rome and India or Persia and Africa, remember the invisible island that helped draw those lines, not with a sword, but with a whispered piece of advice, a basket of flawless shells, and the deep red sap of a tree found nowhere else on Earth. If this hidden history of quiet power captivated you, we invite you to delve deeper into the mysteries of the past by subscribing for more content. And we would love to hear your thoughts. Which other forgotten catalysts of history do you believe secretly shaped our world from the shadows? Share your discoveries in the comments below.